Alrighty, I think we're live. Good morning. My name is Katya, and I'm excited to introduce today's event, Advisory Boards for Startups, what every entrepreneur needs to know. The goal of today is to establish the benefits of establishing an advisory board, as well as how this raises your own profile as an entrepreneur for investors. But before we begin, I would like to use this time to highlight one of our gold sponsor, G2. Headquartered in Chicago, G2.com is revolutionizing the way businesses discover, buy, and manage software and services. More than 3 million users per month rely on G2 to help them find and buy the best software for their businesses. The platform has more than 1 million verified reviews. Now, back to the event. Naomi Kent will be the host today. Naomi is the president of InTouch, a Chicago based business network of over 40,000 board members, executives, entrepreneurs, and advisors globally. InTouch allows businesses to connect with their members and recruit them to their boards at no cost, offering startups and small businesses the chance to quickly find diverse advisory board members. Naomi currently sits on an advisory board herself of an iced tea startup based out of Pennsylvania and is also on the board of the British American Business Council in Chicago. Naomi, I will hand it to you.
Thank you, Katya, and thank you to Chicago Startup Week for inviting us on here, and thank you all for joining. I'm going to give a quick introduction to my two co-speakers here today. Joe Norton is an experienced advisory board member in the tech, cyber, digital, and security fields. He brings to these boards strategic advice, risk management, and also an ability to improve performance across, specifically in startup businesses. Originally from New York, but has spent the last 25 years in Chicago, so we can call you a Chicagoan, Joe. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
I've
never been called as an honorary Chicagoan before.
You are now. I am. I've only a couple of years. And we also have Tom Marin joining us. He's an entrepreneur. He's got a finance and investing background. He launched his first business right here in Chicago in 2019 and has recruited an impressive advisory board through InTouch. His company's called Southport Group and is focused on supporting small business ownership transition and growth. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Naomi. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. Okay. Katya, we're just to the next slide. You gave me a wonderful introduction. So I'm just going to be very brief here. I've been working in the board space for over 20 years, so very familiar with businesses building boards, people who are also searching for boards, and sit on a couple of boards myself. I'm really passionate about boards of directors because I've seen the impact that it can have on startups and on businesses that are trying to get off the ground. So excited to be having this conversation with you all today. Joe, I'm going to hand it over to you to give your introduction. Katya, next slide, please.
Oh, I get to introduce myself. Huh? Well, I've been, if you take a look at my bald head and gray hair, I've been around that long. So I've actually spent an entire career in the technology spaces and have served in a number of CXO positions around the world with McDonald's, Novartis, Philips, Atos, McKinsey, JP Morgan, etc. And along the way, I kept getting asked to help a little bit, play the advisory game. And these days I'm semi-retired, and I actually am on several boards, advisory boards right now, with a security tech startup in services startup in Chicago, another one in encryption, and I'm also on 2 nonprofit community boards these days. Startups, global firms, whatever, it keeps things interesting. Thank you.
And I think just to give this, I'm sure everybody in the room is thinking the same thing, you know, the level of seniority that these advisors are at, you know, they've been through what you've been through, and they've definitely experienced a lot along the way. Tom, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Naomi. So my background is primarily working at larger firms early in my career. So I spent a number of years working at investment banks and a private equity firm where I worked to acquire businesses. I always had an entrepreneurial edge, and eventually formed Southport Group, which is focused on acquiring small businesses from retiring business owners. For example, let's say Dave founded a car wash business here in Chicago, grew it to a point where it was very successful, but ultimately he wanted to spend more time with family or move to Florida. So we would look to acquire his business. So Southport Group, my firm, is a startup, but we're looking to invest in mature companies. I knew early on that I could benefit from advisors, people who had done what I was hoping to do, and could be mentors along the way. So I ultimately formed an advisory board. I currently have 2 advisors who help me think through issues and provide advice. And right now at 2, may look to add more going forward, but starting small.
Oh, thank you, Tom. So let's get on to the agenda for today. We're going to talk to you a little bit about what an advisory board is. We're also going to talk about the benefits and challenges of having an advisory board, how to set one up, and then how to manage it as well. There is Q&A at the end, but if you want to throw in your questions along the way in the chat, please do. But to start, we're going to kick off with a poll. So if you all check out the main stage poll, you would see that there are 2 questions. The first one is, does your business currently have an advisory board? Please answer yes or no as quickly as you can. And then, are you looking to bring on advisors to help grow your business? And this can be at any time, not necessarily the next month or 2, but possibly thinking about it in the next 12 to 24 months. And then for the second part of this slide, we're going to look at entering. If you could enter into the chat 2 things. What is your role and title? And the second thing is, in which industry do you operate or plan to operate when you launch? I understand from the audience today that there are a lot of people who are very seriously considering being an entrepreneur, and you have some wonderful ideas which you want to put into action. So excited to see where everyone's at and what they might be looking to do. Okay, we've got some people in ed tech. We've got a CTO. Is everyone able to see the polls? I'm going to just answer them there. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we've got about 70. This is great. 70% so far have said that they are looking to bring on advisors to grow their business. And does your business currently have an advisory board? Majority say no. So, but 30% did say yes. So small group here who do have an advisory board, possibly looking to grow it or maybe manage it. Some ideas that we can share here today. Okay. Wonderful, and keep answering the poll for people who join. All right, so what is an advisory board? So I'm going to take us through this just very briefly. Tom touched on it, so did Joe. It's really a group of trusted advisors to you, the founder, and possibly other executives. If they're a very senior level people, and I mean senior level in terms of their importance, they might be developing your app. They might be thinking and innovating in your product. These are the types of people that might need the support and advice from people like Joe and people in the field. You can have the group of about 2, 3 to 5 people. Tom has 2. I know, Joe, you've been part of boards with 4 to 5, maybe 6 people. This is sort of, I guess, the average size for most of you who are starting out. Now, what do they do generally? They provide expertise, guidance, insight on the industry, which can be very helpful. You got to remember, people like Joe sit on multiple boards. They are not just on your board. So they will be looking and experiencing technology advancements and other interesting business-related advancements that are going on at other firms and bringing them back to you. So this is incredibly helpful. An advisory board should have purpose. The purpose of the advisory board should be relationships, credibility. Don't forget credibility for investors, and also bringing on other individuals to your business too. They don't have any fiduciary responsibilities, so they don't vote. They can't fire you, which is a great thing, and they can't, close the company or do anything. They're really there to help you and to advise you on avoiding risk and growing the company. The other great thing is if you are thinking big about your businesses, I'm sure a lot of you are, and you're thinking, well, one day, you know, this could be the next IPO or this could be the next big thing. We definitely will need a board of directors. So some of those advisory board members do actually graduate into being on the board of directors. So it can be a very good way to kind of build that pipeline. Okay, let's talk about the benefit of having an advisory board. Tom, I'm going to sort of hand this over to you in terms of just walking us through some of these bullet points here that you think need to be, and your experiences as well.
Yeah, thanks, Naomi. So I was initially interested in having an advisory board primarily for guidance and advice. I looked at my skill set and knew that there were areas that I wasn't quite as strong or where I just didn't have the prior experience. So, for example, as I look to go out and acquire a company, there might be a business that does medical packaging, and it might take me weeks or even months of research to figure out if that's a good industry for me to be in. However, an advisory board, somebody on an advisory board might be able to tell me quickly that that is not a good industry to be in. There's other areas, for example, looking for a lawyer where maybe an advisory board member could be very helpful. So the goal was to really save me time and accelerate my business. This at sort of a flexible cost or on a flexible trade-off. As a startup, I have a vision, but I don't have processes, significant income, so I'm looking for a flexible arrangement, and that's where I think an advisory board is a great fit. It's hard being a startup to commit to certain time and money arrangements. So as in an advisory board role, you can structure it in the best way that works for you. So I, for example, have structured my time commitments with advisors differently, meaning that in some cases, there's a good fit to have highly recurring meetings during certain parts of my business's growth. And then there's other times when, I'm very busy on one piece of my business, and so it doesn't make sense to meet as regularly. And this is where an advisory board is a good fit because you can be flexible with the time commitment and arrangements. The third one I'll talk about, or another topic I'll touch on here, is also credibility. It was very important to me to have others on my team, especially as I go to meet business owners who might be interested in selling their company. Some of them are significantly older than I am, so it helps to have people on my team with years and decades of experience that they can bring to bear. So Joe or Naomi, anything else to add?
Well, I think the flexibility is key. When you have a young company, as Tom said, you may have the brightest ideas in the world, and when you look to grow, there's always these interesting stages you go through as a company, right? And when you start, you run your company very flexible. You're very, very agile, right? And then as you grow, you're still trying to run what you have, and wherever your services are or your product is, and you're taking it out to the market, and you hit these instability points where I got this figured out, I got this much work, and there's revenue coming in, and I got these many employees, and then suddenly you get this opportunity, and the next thing you know, you're doubling, and now you're bringing on more people or what have you, and these little pockets of instability come in, and as you hit these stepping stones in growing your business, it's, well, what do I need next? And if you haven't lived through that experience, advisors from different industries, from startups to big companies, et cetera, can not only advise you on what the big things are, the big risks, or how to get funding, or to help you present, or credibility with other investors or other companies. It's the little things. It's the processes. It's the flow. How much process do you need? What type of skill sets or people could you bring in to help fill those out? How do you fill out your board? And Naomi touched on another thing is, for example, I'm working with a stealth stage company right now, very small, interesting startup. And they did everything backwards. Instead of trying to, taking an approach to go, I've got an idea, let me convince people my idea is good, let's go get a little bit of money. And first thing they did was they went off into stealth mode and they built the product and wrapped some services around it. So the entire core of the company is very technically and operations oriented. No marketing, no sales, no investment, which is a good thing. Depends on where you are, okay, et cetera. And now they're trying to go to market. So part of the it's okay. It's just that part of the, advisors can also help you with that relationship to other people. For an example, in this particular case with this company, I'm introducing them to people from my network who used to work for me and now have prominent roles in other global companies who are expressing an interest in this type of product and service. Those connections, if you're by yourself, sometimes are very hard to go find or require a lot of time and effort to go get. So there's so many different things you can do in an advisory board or advisors, whether it's one or two people or more.
Well, actually, Joe, let's jump to the next slide. Let's talk about benefits of being an advisory board member, which I think is important too, that the startups here understand why would people even want to be on a board, an advisory board, right? So tell us about that. What are the benefits?
Well, the last third of my career I spent doing big multinational company performance turnarounds. I would do, small departments, big departments, operations for multi-billion-dollar companies. And then usually that type of work for me at that stage of my career was they were 3 or 4 year executive contracts, right? After 4 years, they'd look me in the eye and say, thank you very much. You accomplished everything we wanted to do, and you're very expensive, so now you can leave. And I'd move on. And I built a career from inside work to consulting to doing the contract work. And after the last one, it was, you can leave. And I said, absolutely, because that's part of the life cycle of doing that kind of work. It was a question of, do I retire? Do I stop? Or what have you? So segueing into board work and advisory work was a very engaging manner for me to continue my career at a lower pace of operations. And when I made that decision to do that, to step back, I did it in the face of a number of opportunities that were thrown at me to go, hey, here's another big operations turnaround to go do. And, I have gray hair. I have a family. It's time to almost start building a ramp to eventually retiring fully, which I may or may not do. But it is rewarded. It keeps me intellectually stimulated. It keeps me at the forward end of the tech field where I spent my entire career, almost 50 years. So from that perspective, it is rewarding. Now, the other thing is, whether it's, the bullet point on the slide says sweat equity or pay or what have you, it's always a mix for me. So I do a little bit of engagement and ownership level at the equity play and a little, some money here or there. Whatever comes in helps me fund my adventures. So I'm a photographer. I do wildlife photography around the world. Hey, it's really nice to be able to turn to my family and say, I'm not using my retirement funds to go on adventures, right? So there's always, and that's me, but there's everybody who plays the game a little bit has a different reason or a different driver for this. Relationships continue. I've been a big fan of, what goes around comes around, and the world is a lot smaller than you think it is. I can reach, I have run into people throughout my career over the decades, and you'd be surprised how we all know each other at different stages of our career, whether it's big companies, small companies, little companies, and we find each other. And as you work with companies, big, small, medium, you make new relationships, and the cycle keeps on going. Sometimes my value add for somebody is when they call me up and they say, hey, do you know anybody out there? Last week someone called and said, hey, listen, do you know anybody in this field in Palm Beach? And I had to think about it, but I know somebody in Palm Beach. And that's how this networking works, right? So anyway, and then there, boards and advisors, we all sort of circle around each other at times, just like we do with different companies in the introductions. And does it enhance my portfolio and experience at this stage in my life? I don't know, but that's not why I'm doing this. Okay, my resume is done almost. Okay, but you can find people who are always looking to give back into the industry, and they're out there. Now, maybe somewhere along the way, one of these other slides will talk about how do you find them besides Naomi, but there's lots of other ways to do that with InTouch Network or other networks. But you'd be surprised when you cast out a net, if you just troll a little bit, you can find plenty of people regardless. And it's the fun part about advisory boards is whatever your specific need is, you can find someone eventually with the skill set and the experience that you're looking for. Okay. We'll talk about what makes a good advisory board member later, but you can always find someone. There's no one size fits all. And you may find someone for an advisory board, and I'll say this up front, an advisory board is not a marriage. An advisory board member for you or an advisor is not a marriage. Okay, it's business. Friendships come out of it, but it's strictly business. You can find someone at this stage, I need this type of expertise to get me through this type of thinking or this hump I want to get over. And then as soon as it's done, you can say, thank you. I loved what you did for me. Go find somebody else for the next need that you have. Sometimes those relationships last for years, but they don't have to. And that's the flexibility that you get with working with an advisory board.
Wonderful. Thanks, Joe. Now, we've painted a very positive picture of an advisory board, but, like anything, it's not always plain sailing. It's not always as easy as it sounds. Tom, we're going to go to the next slide and talk a little bit about what are the challenges that you've seen and that you've experienced managing an advisory board. Tell us about those.
Yeah, sounds good. So my biggest challenge, or one of my challenges, was kind of this common thread of structural unknowns, I'll call it. It's, when to meet, frequency, as a group or alone, just the informal nature. And I think it can be a little bit intimidating at first because there's not always a firm structure. But I think as an owner or an entrepreneur, it gives you the opportunity to set it up in the way that best works for you. And so it took me a bit to realize that, but it's flexible intentionally. And so if you are at a stage where you need a lot of help or you could really benefit from speaking with people more often, that's how you can work with an advisory board or structure it in that way. And then on the flip side, if you're very busy on one aspect of your business, you can, maybe meet less frequently. So setting that up and building that cadence and process was intimidating up front, but ultimately I laid out a schedule and then tweaked from there. So it has become sort of an iterative process. And I would recommend, or what I learned was setting up kind of the entire, or having a vision for how often you plan to meet up front goes a long way. So arranging, calls in advance, maybe for the full year, and laying out what the expectations are on a monthly basis, or how otherwise you plan to work with people up front is important. And you can change it as you go, but it definitely helps to have that up front. And then also, finding people you trust. We'll talk about this more in a bit, but I am working in a field where there might be an investment. And so I wanted to make sure that I really felt great about my advisors, because they could be, longer term partners from a financial perspective. And so, I did actually do reference checks and actually offered reference checks on myself as well as a way to kind of verify, who people are, and then got to know them. I mean, it was sort of a process of, a few calls, few meetings, and spent time up front, ensuring it was the right person.
Wonderful. Thank you. And why don't we move on to challenges of actually serving on an advisory board? Next slide. Yeah. So Joe, again, it's great. It's enjoyable, but it's not always plain sailing, right?
Well, no. So it's smooth sailing when you have a good fit, right? So if you have a set of known needs and or things that you're looking to learn about or get advice on, whatever it may be, if you know what that is and you can match it up with someone who can bring that experience and knowledge to you, then usually it works really, really well. Smooth sailing, as you say. If you bring someone on board as an advisor because somebody else told you, and you bring them on board and then you find out they don't have what you're looking for, or they're not paying attention to you or something like that, it can get a little rocky and you have to ask yourself, why am I talking to this person? What value are they adding? Okay. So the most important thing is not just, one is the person, whoever you bring on board as an advisor should add value. Okay. And you should feel you're learning something. Now, they're not teachers. You have to ask, right? What do you need? What are you looking for? What do you have? Don't expect an advisor to sit back there and watch you like, a family member and say you're going off the rails. They may do that, but you got to ask and point to the kind of value equation that you're looking for. And the other piece is just like any other hire with any other employee for any other part of your business, it's about personality. Because, you may look at me and say, hey, the hypothetical, one of you out there calls me up and says, hey, Joe, I want to talk to you about being an advisor to help me out. Sounds great. Okay. The first time we have a private conversation, your reaction may be, oh my God, I can't stand this guy. Okay. Or this woman. And it has nothing to do with me personally or you personally. It could be a personality mismatch. There's a reason why we've pre-COVID, when I'd always go have lunch or dinner with somebody before I'd make a commitment, because I wanted to watch them in a social setting. And I was doing that for people who wanted to hire me. Okay. You should be doing the same with the people you want to hire, because if you're going to work closely together and share the intimate details of your business or your risks or your fears or your needs and ask for advice, you better be sure you've got the right person. And it's not just knowledge and experience or a resume, but there is this personality equation that works between you. It's very, very important, because if it doesn't work, don't do it or end it, change it, right? I learned, as we all learn, right, is that it takes time. And if you've got somebody on 7 boards, you're probably not going to get the commitment that you're looking for. Okay. I'm working with 2 nonprofits and two profits. Okay. One nonprofit is very low key. One is a community-based organization that I actually think today has taken up too much of my time. Right. And I'm probably going to work my way into a different role or off it, one or the other. Okay. But I've limited myself to 2 other companies at the moment, because that's the stage of work that we're engaged in. And there should never be a conflict between an advisor and an owner. Never. If you ever find yourself in a relationship with an advisor that you brought on, always remember you're paying something. No advisor does anything for you for free. There's always going to be an equity play, or there's going to be a cash play in there. You have to pay them something. Okay. So, it's a business relationship, and there should never be a conflict about who's running the business. It's your business. And for many people who step into advisory roles, it's a hard switch to move to the advisor when you used to be the boss yourself. Okay. And anyone who is out there thinking of doing advisory work should be very conscious of that. Okay. And if you're running a company or building your company and taking it forward, always be aware that it is a business relationship and the advisor is there to help you. It may not be a strict, hirer, employer, employee relationship. It's an advisory thing, but it is still a business relationship. There should never be any conflict. We can advise, but you have to make the decision. Can't make decisions for you. Okay. And whenever there's conflicts and disagreements, hey, that's a personality thing. Sometimes a little creative tension is fine. And what to look for there, if you're having meetings or discussions, somebody thinks this, somebody thinks that, it's okay to put them on the table. It's even okay for people to get a little bit warm under the collar sometimes. Okay, as long as when it's over, you look at each other and you say, "Hey, that was fun. Hey, we have strong opinions. That's okay." If you can't step away from that. All right. If feelings linger, then you got a personality problem with people. And you shouldn't let them. You should always address them and say, why did that happen? I value you have value for me, or you don't. And what's more important, the value or the personality disruption? Never let that happen with your employees. Never let that happen with your advisors, please. And I love this one all the time. Dealing with inexperienced founders and CEOs. Guess what? Everybody starts out inexperienced. Okay. So I started out inexperienced a long time ago, but I was inexperienced. There's things that I'm still inexperienced in. Don't ever try and put me into doing stuff for you that I'm not capable of doing or I don't have the background for. And if you have an advisor that you're trying to get some support from, or someone you're trying out in the role, and they get frustrated with you, or they give you the old, well, why don't you know that routine? That's the wrong person. I got to tell you, it's the wrong person, right? You got to have an advisor, anyone working or helping you from an advisory capacity should have the maturity, the social graces, and the social equity and background to understand that that's why they're here to help, and that you're growing a business and you're growing into your role. And if that person cannot demonstrate that to you, they could be the smartest guy in the world or woman with the biggest resume and, gold stars squirting out of their ears. Okay. And guess what? They're not the fit for you. So now I'm not trying to scare people off, because there's a lot of good people out there. There are absolutely a lot of good people. And part of the reward of being an advisor is what one of my owners said to me the other day was, "You're right, Joe, you pushed me. I needed that. Thank you. And I'm still learning from you." And they said, thanks. Okay. That's part of the reward side of being an advisor, is when, hey, listen, when the advice is good and it gets picked up and then you see the results in somebody's business, it's a great feeling. It's a pat on the back, right? So knowing when to leave a board when you're not contributing. Hey, listen, if I'm an advisor to you and you're not listening to me, sooner or later, I'm going to leave. You're not going to have to ask me to leave. Right. And a good advisor knows when that they're not adding value and they're just taking your money or your equity. And if they don't recognize it, help them out the door.
Nice advice, Joe. Thank you. Thank you. This is interesting, and I'm sure everybody in the room is starting to think up their questions, so please have those prepared. I'm going to say a little bit on the next slide about how to set up an advisory board. So just to back up a second, InTouch is a network of board members and advisors. Joe is one of our members, and they are all board ready. They have been through training or they have board experience. So they're very well versed in working for businesses like yours. When you sort of start this process, please speak to me and I'll share my contact information with you all. But really, you want to think about what is the purpose and the goal for your company. What's the vision for the next 12 to 24 months. It's not about just going out there to find someone who knows a little bit more than you. And it's also worth saying, if you have skills in one area, you may be considering somebody with skills in a different area. The story that Joe told earlier about the company that had thought through the product and thought through the technology, but hadn't thought through the sales, is exactly where I'm sort of suggesting is, if sales and marketing are not your area of expertise, bring in or have advice at least from somebody who does. And then where do you look? So InTouch, we are actually a no-fee organization. So for startups, we do not charge, and actually any business, we do not charge a fee for any introduction made to any one of our members. Obviously, following that, there's going to be an agreement of what the level of engagement will be between the two of you, but that's certainly a private conversation that happens. But you can also start recruiting through people in your contacts, right? People that you know. Some students once said to me, yeah, we looked in our alumni network and we found some people. So I threw that in there as well. And then, parents of friends and family, if you're really bootstrapped, you can get advice from people. However, I will caution, especially some startups I've known that have gone into business with family and friends. It's not the same relationship as when you have a formal professional relationship with an advisor. Again, it can get a little messy perhaps at times. So always worth considering that. You always want to think about the balance of the board as well. So, Tom, tell us, what is the balance of skills between the two people on your board? Is there, do they have complementary skills?
They do. So I got started, looked at what I was planning to do over the next 12 to 24 months, and I wanted advisors that had experience in business acquisitions and business operations. And that's what I found through InTouch, actually. So my advisory board members have been fantastic.
And just like Tom, what kind of size do you start with? Two people, if you're a really early startup, two really amazing advisors, and then building on it from there can be the right way to go. You've got to remember who's going to manage and communicate with these advisors. It's going to be you. It's going to be someone in your business. And so you need to think, do I have the time to dedicate to this? You don't want to overstretch yourself with 5 or 6 people to start with. So I would definitely go small. And then, what do you pay? Now, I'll tell a quick story before I hand it over to Joe, because I know that he's on the receiving end. But we have had stories where very early stage startups have got involved with advisors, and they've almost had an agreement where they'll work together for maybe 3-6 months maximum. And during that time, they kind of see how they're going to work together. There's no agreement of equity. There's no agreement of pay, but it's almost like this, do we work well together? Is this a relationship? And it's great for you. You get to know the individual, and it's great for them. They get to know you a little better. And just to be clear, when I say 3 months, it's not a full-time job at 3 months, right? It would be maybe, 1 30-minute call per week, or per every other week. So you can be flexible. Advisory boards are absolutely flexible, and you can put your proposal forward. But Joe, tell us about what we can expect, or what early stage startups should be thinking about.
So, Naomi, your point about what do you expect drives what the return should be for an advisor, right? If it's a light touch, I want to talk to you once a month, well then, I don't know, maybe it's 1%. Okay. So when people talk to me about an equity play with a young company, the very early stages of a company, people aren't talking about setting up the constructs for what's a percentage of ownership or percentage of equity, but it really is about a percentage point, right? If it requires more time, et cetera, it could be anywhere, grow up to, I've never seen it exceed 5%. Okay. And it depends on the stage, if you're taking outside investment, et cetera, but usually somewhere between 1% to 3% of equity if someone's going to stay. All right. Now you may say, I'm going to give away 3% of my company to someone I just want some advice from. No, you don't do that. if you want to do an equity play, you set it up in an expectation of what somebody else thinks their level of effort and time has to be to work with you, and what that is worth to them, and then set up a participation agreement that's tied to specific deliverables from the advisor to you, to your company, or triggers. So, for example, in this stealth company, that I'm using the term stealth because I don't want to tell you who it is yet. I have a participation agreement that's worth more than one might think from an equity play. It's worth more than 2%, let's put it that way. However, I have stepping stones based on triggers for the company's performance and growth. And if we hit certain triggers, then I get another increment of equity. Okay. And it's fully vested when I receive it. So it's not like something that says, okay, we're going to give you this and it's an option in 6 years, it's worth something. No, it's a percentage of equity at the very early stage, but there are performance triggers. So we put a cap on it, and I have a set of performance triggers with the companies. Some of those performance triggers are mine directly to the company. Some of those have to do with the whole company has to hit a performance level and result in going to market and gaining revenue share, et cetera. And you structure it, and you got to think about that. And that was a dialogue between me and the founder, okay, at the time. I have another one where there is no equity plays, pure cash, just like being on a board of directors. And that was what was mutually agreed to by the owner of that company and myself. And they said, this is what I'd like you to do and help me with. It takes more of my time than one might imagine. But they send me a check every month. Okay. And my engagement level is anywhere from 1 hour a week to 10. And it floats based on what's going on. So they can be eating up, the equivalent of a week, a month of my time. Right now, is it proportional? Sure it is. But for young companies, small companies, a cash play is not for an advisor or a board of directors member in a small company is not going to be like you hear these big figures, $150,000 to be a board member at McDonald's. Okay. For example. And I was at McDonald's, so I know what they got. I was the CTO at McDonald's. Okay. No, it's more in the range of a board of directors for a small company. It could be anywhere from 20 to 30 or whatever $1,000 a year. Okay. Who knows? Do you have that kind of money? Usually someone that's got revenue, they may think about, I don't want to give away ownership. I'd rather pay someone. Whereas the youngest of companies that say, I don't have any money, then you got to think about participation. Okay. And that's just the way it works. Right? There's a couple of good questions out there, Naomi, on the chat side. Somebody asked when I made the comment about getting to know personalities in these virtual times and environments, can you just Zoom or chit chat? Whatever works for you. So maybe you don't do that. But, if you feel comfortable going out and sitting 6 feet or 10 feet away from each other outdoors and having some Starbucks or something, give it a shot. My message is not how to do it. My message is test the personalities. Okay. I mean, I've had correspondence with people throughout, in my career, hiring and firing people. It's like, my God, I talked this, I got a resume, it looked great. Spoke to them on the phone, sounded good. Okay. Met them in person. I went, my God, I can't hire that person. Okay. And in return, I've said the same thing to people. You can't hire me blind. Right. So if you're comfortable with using video platforms like this, I mean, I've been doing work all around the world. I've been using video platforms for 15 years. This isn't something new for me. I'm fairly comfortable with this and the technology. One would hope with my background, right? If you got an advisor and in today's day and age, and your primary communications channel is going to be video platforms, because they don't have to live in the same town as you. They could live in a different country, okay? And they can't figure out how to use Zoom or Google Meets or something like that. That's probably not going to work for you, okay? But yeah, of course, you can use video platforms to do that. But do more than one chat. Do more than one session. Get to know each other over time, right?
One thing I was also thinking, Joe, is when one of the founders of a company that I'm on a board of at the moment, he actually called me up and said, "Hey, could you speak and go and speak to one of these potential board members?" So he had already had the conversation, but wanted somebody else that he trusted to speak to them and meet them. So I spent an hour on the phone, on a Zoom as well, and really did a lot of digging online to see who this person was, to make sure that they were, a trustworthy person, authentic. So you could also, you don't have to do all of the work of interviewing people. If you have people you trust around you, you can help.
So again, I'll always come back to it's no different than hiring. If you were a well-established company today and you had an HR manager or a director and you were going to do a hire, you'd be doing background checks, criminal checks. You may be doing drug testing. You'd be doing more than one interview. You might be having 3 or 4 people in the company interview a person, or even doing a group interview where you brought someone in for an interview board. If you were willing to, in the early stage of a young company, share participation of ownership in your company, would you not do that level of due diligence? I can tell you, when I've been approached for opportunities for advisory roles or board roles, I've done the same due diligence on you. You better believe it, okay? Because the one thing I do not want to do is link myself to something that is just not real, or the person's not serious and committed to what they're trying to ask me to help them with. So it goes both ways, and it should, okay? And if it's a little flippant in an approach, I can tell you, for me, as a potential advisor for anyone, that is a red flag for me. And if you're speaking to someone as a potential advisor and you're going to give them money or a piece of ownership in your company, no matter how you structured that deal, and they're pretty flippant about it and they're not serious and they're not playing the due diligence game with you, or they're not offering you due diligence or references, then that should be a red flag for you. Okay. It's that simple.
Yeah. I agree with everything that's been said on this topic, and it was a bit of an aha moment for me. I think structuring an advisory board agreement is not something that you can just Google. I certainly tried. It's meant to be flexible and a win-win for both parties. And there's not a template. So where I started, or sort of the framework that I ultimately used, was thinking about what I could give and also what I was looking for to make it a two-way path. And so on the giving side, it's a chance to be a part of something, but there's usually also compensation of some sort attached, be it equity or cash. And then on the receiving side, it was usually some kind of time commitment, whether it's monthly, quarterly, weekly. And then a few other factors as well. For example, confidentiality is important. Introductions, potentially financial investments, or other areas. And these are flexible, or there's ways to structure these. So, for example, your pre-revenue, sometimes you can do a milestone agreement for I can't pay you today, but assuming we hit this, that's when payment would be made, or that's when we can address that. And so contingencies, and then there's other ways with time also, maybe up to 5 hours or 2 hours on a quarterly basis or monthly basis, or more at the advisor's discretion. And I've talked to startups where the founder was a doctor, where they worked 7 days on, 7 days off. So they had 7 days off to go start a business, but they did have income. So they had some, cash to use to compensate advisors. But the flip side, sometimes it's, college students where cash may not be as abundant, and, maybe equity is the right way to find advisors. And it's giving up equity is, tough psychologically, but I think there's often a chance to really accelerate growth in a business, or even the chance to shift from something that could be defunct or may not really turn into anything, or become highly successful. So it can be a huge benefit as well.
Tom, when we were chatting earlier, you told me about your bootstrapping story of when you went to find the contracts for the advice, right? We'll all be familiar with this.
That's right. I looked everywhere. I was like just Googling templates, talking to legal advisors, and it kind of took a while for me to really come to terms with the fact that there isn't like a set template out there you can use. There's certainly people who have done advisory board roles before and may have some starting place, but it really should be unique to what you have and can bring as well as what you're looking for. And I think, as Joe put it before, there's many people out there, and some advisors may have just retired from a job, have all the free time in the world and be the perfect fit, or somebody might be looking for significant compensation and not have the time. So it can be very unique to find the right person and what they're looking for. So a standard template is certainly hard to find or non-existent.
Let me make a comment to what Tom was just talking about. When you talk about putting an agreement together, I don't know that you could Google and find an advisor type template. However, the closest thing to it is a consulting contract. It's like putting a statement of work together for a consulting agreement or a management consulting agreement. That's where you'd find something similar, because it's deliverable based. My understanding of your situation is thus: you have asked for the following support. These are the things that I would like you to deliver to me or help me with, and so on and so forth, and how much level of effort of your time we expect from you, and the cycles, how will we work or communicate, and you find more of an approach to putting agreements together in that way. Someone asked a question in the chat, Michael, about performance triggers. So here's one example. My stealth company, I have a performance trigger to a performance tick that triggers when I bring my stealth company to 3 established corporations, and those companies commit to doing what I would call a racetrack trial of our product and services. So it's getting a commitment through talking, meeting, networking, etc., introducing the company, doing board tabletop demonstrations and briefings and tabletop demonstrations with the management team of this company to a potential client, not trying to sell the product, because that's not the stage we're at. We're pre-beta, so to speak, right? So we're not doing a proof of concept. We just want to get real world trials with a willing somebody in a multinational company to try out the product, kick the tires, and tell us what they like and what they don't like. And that is explicitly stated in my participation agreement, that it goes to 1, 2, 3, bing, and there's an increment. That's one type of example. Somebody else asked a question, Michael, I think the same person, Michael, he asked about references. How do I find? I'm not sure what kind of references are you saying. What would you do? What would be, who would, or what would be my references? If somebody's starting out, you have references. I have references. For example, when people want to check me out, they can go to any company I work for and find people who know me. I have personal references and testimonials. I have phone numbers and people's and emails. I can say, hey, here's people I've worked with, other executives, other staff members, other leaders here. Here's people I worked with in professional societies. I was a founder of an executive board for a professional society, and I still maintain a membership in that. Go talk to the board. They'll tell you about me. Those are examples of references.
But who would be his? So I think Michael's saying he's brand new startup, maybe hasn't had much corporate or any professional experience. He's launching a new product or a new brand. I mean, say anybody who's been working with you, your parents, anybody who's funding this, right?
Yeah, they're all your references.
You gotta get some.
If this is specific, Michael asked a question, so let's make it specific to Michael. First, I start off by saying, Michael, I don't know you. I don't know how old you are. I don't know where you worked before, but wherever you've done in your life, you did it. So whatever level that experience is, you have references. And it's not important to me as a potential advisor that you have 30 years experience in some sort of industry or anything else. What's important is I know who you are and I know where you're coming from professionally. And I come to understand why you're doing this and why you're asking for my assistance. That's what's important about references. It's not that they be stellar or big or, knock the walls down. It's more about the relationship between two people. Okay.
Joe, I'm sure we've all got a story of where there are startups and founders that, who have had a history of fraud allegations or committed fraud, right? And we've all heard of businesses today, huge businesses that have gone under because of fraudulent CEOs and fraudulent founders. So, it's really also a background check. Just understanding who you are and your authenticity, I think. Yeah.
About 10 years ago, I'm going to say 15 years ago, I was asked to help a rapid growth startup before some of the downturns. And it was just one of these little industry plays that was growing. They were spinning it out from another company. And I was like, wow, I like what you're doing. It was completely out of my background, but it had a technology field and they wanted me to help with their technology people and stuff. And it just was like, hey, it struck me as cute. And, I love it and everything else. They were going to give me stock and they start throwing these agreements at me and everything. I says, let me test what you're doing as a business and see how you run a little bit, because they were a little farther along. Right. And after I met the prime players, I almost ran. Okay. And 9 months later, they shut the company down and 3 of them were indicted. So trust me, those things happen. Okay. And the one thing I can tell you about most stuff in my life, professionally and personally, if in your gut it doesn't feel good, it ain't. Okay. And that's what the references are about. Naomi said, just getting to know each other a little bit.
Okay. Well, I know we're coming up on time here. So listen, amazing advice from you both. Thank you. I'm sure there are a lot more questions and people are thinking through their next steps. I've just shared my LinkedIn in the chat. Very much available to even just have a conversation, right? And just talk to you about what your next steps might look like. But Tom, Joe, thank you. Thank you for joining us and for sharing all this wonderful advice with everybody here. Appreciate it.
Excellent. And I just put my email in the chat if anybody wants to reach out. I'm always happy to talk to people.
Awesome. Well, I would just like to give you guys another round of applause. That was such an amazing session. Thank you so much, Naomi, Tom, and Joseph, for being here today. I definitely took many points away, and I know that we had such an active chat, and I hope you guys took some points away too. This will be recorded, and it'll be uploaded to YouTube actually right after we end today, so just know you can always come back and reference it on our YouTube channel. I also want to thank the audience for being here and attending. We would love for you to actually share your feedback on every event that you come, especially the ones where you attended. And in order to do so, we would love you to share it on your Instagram stories or any other social media platforms. And you can do this by tagging at Chicago Startup Week to let us know what you thought. And then for the audience members, I now want to encourage you to take a short break and then return back later today for the next events we have planned. We have Startup Advising on Speed Dial at 12:30 p.m. and then Student Performer Showcase at 1 p.m. on the main stage. And without further ado, we will see you there. Thank you guys so much and have a good day.
Naomi.